So that's where this gets weird. And that's where I think the Democratic Party missed the boat here. So I'm going to say something that is going to be a little crazy, but the MAHA movement, it should have been a blue movement. It has blue agenda written all over it. Health, wellness, individual health choices, addressing the root cause, policy that helps everyone. Those are historically Democratic Party efforts. As someone who voted Democrat, I'll be the first to say that I think Democrats made a huge mistake not taking this movement seriously and addressing these concerns in a way that appealed to the wellness girlies, because the wellness girlies, they decided this vote. So voters were more concerned about grocery bills and the health crisis. So not taking that seriously and then not providing answers, the Republican Party was left to scoop that up and make them feel heard.
Welcome to the Feminist Wellbeing Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Dodier, non-diet nutritionist, cognitive behavior coach, and I've earned myself a PhD in diet culture. And at the age of 40, after graduating from 25-year dieting career, I said, no more. And I'm here today on this podcast to help you reshape your mind instead of your pants for your best well-being. And I'm recording this episode on November 15th, bright and early in the morning at 6:30. I got my coffee with me because I want to put this episode that we titled What Actually Will Make America Healthy Again. And I say we because I have a guest. I'm recording this intro with my coffee, still in my PJ, because I want to get this out to you as quickly as possible. And I want to come back on the timeline a little bit to contextualize this episode here. As depending when you're listening, November 6, 2024 was the American election, and the president-elect is Trump with the Republican Party, which, in the relationship to why we're talking about this on this podcast, they have a proposal, an agenda with regards to health. And their proposal, their agenda is called Making America Healthy Again. And that was part of the package that voted president-elect on November the 6th on the American election. And as some of you perhaps already listened, on November the 7th, I released a bonus coaching episode because many of us on this platform here share values and particular views on health, particularly when it comes to women. And the election was difficult emotionally, mentally, and in some cases physically for many of us. So if you haven't, scroll back up on the feed, probably a couple of episodes, you should see a bonus episode called Navigating Political Change. And in this episode, one of the things I said was that I will come back with another episode to talk about specifically the agenda or the proposal regarding health. And this is this episode today. I found the perfect guest to have this conversation with because I did not want to be alone to have this conversation for a number of reasons. Number one, I'm Canadian, I'm not American. Although I have a high level knowledge or understanding of American politics, there's no way I understand it like an American does. I wanted someone with an acumen in politics, also somebody who deeply understands public health from a science perspective. And I wanted a person self-identified as a woman to have this conversation because I wanted to bring the lens of women's health. And so on November the 9th, on Saturday morning, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through Instagram, answering some DM, and then one of my followers sent me this post from a woman named Amanda Howell. And it was her perspective as an American, someone who has a master in public health, somebody who studied politics alongside with public health, and somebody who also is studying to have her master in nursing, specializing in women's health. I'm like, oh my God, I found my guest. I found the person with whom I can have, to the best of our ability, a neutral conversation about the health proposal and how it can affect us as women and what we should focus on when it comes to our individual and communal initiative for the next 4 years. And Amanda is here today to have this conversation with us. She's highly qualified, way more than me, to have this conversation at the public health level, at the community level. And we wanted, when we discuss about how we're going to do this episode, to keep it as much as we could neutral in order for us to bring as many people into the conversation so we can explore perhaps another perspective, or at least how we need to think about the proposal of President-elect when it comes to health for all of us as a community level. So, in the podcast show notes, you will have a number of links to information that we discuss in this podcast. We will also, as usual, have the information for you to connect to Amanda. And I just want to quickly go through her bio to make sure everyone understands who is going to be communicating with you today alongside with me. Her name is Amanda Howell. She's a public health professional. She is working in public health in America as we speak right now. She has a master in public health with a focus on political science and psychology. She is studying towards her master in nursing, specializing in women's health and reproductive justice. And today, she's building her business called Empower Her Health, and specializing right now with a course in pregnancy. So we're going to talk about reproductive care towards the end of the interview as well, with her unique lens on that. I would love to hear from you, and Amanda as well. We would love to hear from you. Both of us are found on Instagram. You can communicate your opinion, your perspective, perhaps things that we've missed. We're both open to having a conversation about the perspective that we shared today on Instagram. So you can find us there and have these conversations with us. And I also want to mention that this interview was recorded on Thursday, November the 14th. And when we finished recording the interview, we both on our own house went on Instagram and noticed that during the time that this interview was recorded, actually, President-elect nominated his health secretary, which is Robert F. Kennedy, which is the pioneer, the person who came up with the agenda, making America healthy again. So throughout the interview, you'll hear us talk about perhaps it will not happen, or perhaps like things will change. We are now confirming that most of the proposal that we discussed during the podcast interview will actually be led by the person who created this agenda, RFK. Perhaps we'll do a second interview in the future. For now, I will let my team patch in the interview, and I can't wait to hear from you. Welcome to the podcast, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, talk about this movement.
Yeah, usually I don't do this, but I'm going to give you some context and background to Amanda to make sure that her and I conversation is grounded into facts. So Amanda, I specifically picked up Amanda to have this conversation because she's got both a political science, a psychology background, and a public health background. Both studied and have degrees in both. And today, Amanda has a company called Empower Her Health, which provide health education, communication, and reproductive health, health policy, nutrition, specifically for women. So when Amanda popped up on my feed on Instagram, I started studying. I'm like, oh my God, this is the person I want to have this conversation with. So today we're going to talk about Make America Healthy Again. We're recording this a week, barely a week after the end of the election of the political campaign in the United States. And Amanda's American also. So I want to have a conversation with her about Make America Healthy Again. What does it stand for? Why and how, or is it problematic? And how we should think about it from another perspective. Are you ready for this conversation?
I hope we're ready for this conversation.
Okay, so let's start us with what is Make America Healthy Again movement?
So, kind of before we dig into the meat, I really did want to say there is no way I can possibly tackle every aspect of this movement. I'm going to do my best to summarize, pick out some of the key pieces, especially regarding the role of social media, misinformation, and then how public health comes into play, and then how this kind of disproportionately affects women and children. There are so many parts of this conversation, and I'm just going to openly admit I cannot touch on them all in one podcast. At some point, there's probably going to be a book about this movement, so we'll wait for that. But the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement, was ultimately a political campaign masquerading as a social justice movement. It's led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's an environmental lawyer, no background in health, but he's really well known for conspiracy views, championing pseudoscience, a lot of skepticism around public health practices. Given that, which controversial views they're hot, right? And then combined with social media algorithms, this movement blew up.
And it was tied in the process of blowing up. It was, am I correct to say that it was also absorbed by the political campaign for the presidency in the United States?
Yes. So I kind of want to focus on how this movement ended up literally affecting a presidential election. So
Perfect.
RFK has historically focused on vaccines, but recently made the switch to chronic disease. He wanted kind of a position in the government, and vaccines were a little too controversial, but switching to chronic disease, everybody cares about that. I mean, nearly, I think it's 133 million Americans have a chronic condition. It's important. It's important to talk about. We need to address it. So he basically switched to this platform, this MAHA platform that wanted to tackle chronic disease. And from what I've gathered, I did a little bit of research, pulled his platform. He had a few key agenda items, and it included things like addressing the root cause of disease, eliminating corporate influences from government health agencies, removing toxins from the environment, improving the food supply. And then there are some scarier items on his list, like doing away with vaccines or vaccine schedules or promotion of alternative medical therapies, removing fluoride from water, pushing a narrative of distrust around public health institutions and professionals like myself, which we'll get into. So taking out the scarier items, the bigger key items, they sound great on paper. I mean, who doesn't want to address the root cause of disease? We're all looking
Yeah.
to do that. All health professionals want to find the root cause of disease. But once you start digging into this movement a little deeper, you start to see why it's problematic and then how it actually ballooned into something that was ultimately able to sway a presidential election, which is scary.
How did it sway the political? Like, I'm very curious because I didn't, as a Canadian, I didn't listen to the details of it. I'm just like, when this came to the front, Maha, right after the election, I'm like, what happened? How did that happen?
Join the club. I will get to honestly the messaging there and how we were kind of all
Yeah.
blindsided, but I kind of wanted to take a second to really dig into kind of how this actually went from a social media movement to a political campaign. So
Yeah.
we're going to talk about some things that I know can be upsetting when we talk about, privilege or, the white women, our role in deciding elections. But when it comes down to it, these are the stats we have, and the stats don't lie.
Yeah.
So social media and conservative white women of wellness, these influencers on social media, they played a massive role in RFK's ability to spread this message. What we're actually kind of seeing, and when I say we, I mean some of my internet colleagues, if you will, that are political analysts who've been tracking this, they basically kind of tracked it down to the trad wives movement on Instagram and TikTok. And so if you aren't familiar with
Yeah,
like
please.
trad wife, it's short for traditional wife. And it's these influencers that are utilizing this messaging. It's generally focused on staying home to care for their children, leaving their careers indefinitely, growing their own food, cooking or baking from scratch, sourdough. And it's all this like nostalgia, right, of the past or returning to simpler times. But the problem is we're not acknowledging like the current privilege or the hardships of those times, like maternal infant death and drought that killed all your crops. So you would die from not being able to eat. So they document all this on their social platforms, and they're usually in like a cute flowery dress, picking fruit out of their garden. It's really great to watch. It feels really normal and natural, right? But it was ultimately packaged as a conservative solution to like modern societal issues, like the cost of rising childcare. Like you stay home to raise your children because we can't afford childcare anymore. So it's starting to get political. You can see like grocery store bills are too expensive. So grow your own food. It's a more economical option for your family. But these women are monetizing their domestic labor, which wasn't traditionally done. So not only are they doing all these things, while talking about the nostalgia of the past, but they're simultaneously making money on it, which is a little interesting, but I digress there. So, this ideology is, whether or not we want to admit it, overly steeped in internalized misogyny and repression. And honestly, it's surprising that it continues to grow. And I think it's going to be researched for a while. So, this group of people in these posts, incredibly persuasive. And this was ultimately the key that the Republican Party used to grow their base of white women voters who ultimately voted Trump into the presidency.
So that was that margin of people that what they call swing the vote. That's the
Yeah.
assumption here.
So obviously it's going to take a while to and we may never
Yeah.
know, but we do know overwhelmingly that this group of white women voted Republican.
Does that go along with the alpha men phenomenon? That trad wife alpha man is kind of going into the same path?
So there's also a religious aspect to this that I can't get
We're
into
not going
because
to get
it's
into,
not my
but
area of expertise, but there's a conservative kind of nationalist view at play here where, trad wives or these traditional wives vote the same way their husbands vote. They are one. So you don't really go against what your
yeah,
husband wants. And I can't speak to that for everyone. I'm sure there are many women that voted differently and didn't say so, but we know overwhelmingly they all voted a certain way. So, kind of bringing it back to how this affects women, women who tend to resonate with this movement also simultaneously tend to just gravitate towards natural or holistic remedies
mm,
for health. And then this is where it gets slippery. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own practice. I'm all about a holistic viewpoint of health. I love looking at the full picture. Holistic just means full picture. Doesn't
yeah,
mean wooey, just means full picture. But it can get weird. And I'm sure you've seen that.
it does because in a way it sounds better. It's a different option to the option that's currently not working for people.
Mhm.
And it sounds really attractive. Plus, there's a little bit of righteousness below that, what I tend to find when we're holistic, we're a little bit better. Could that be
Well,
right?
and natural. Natural sounds fantastic, but then we go into the logical fallacies, the appeal to nature. Natural is not always better. There are a lot of things that are natural that will kill you. So it's a really fine line. It gets slippery. So when you have this huge social media movement, all of these women drawn into it, this trad wife thing, and then everyone wants to be natural, holistic, it gets problematic. So this rallying cry online ultimately wasn't focused on addressing root causes. It turned into the elimination of certain food ingredients like red dye 40, right? That's how America's going to be healthy. We got to focus on natural food with no dyes. And while there are many different aspects to this movement, that was one of the largest ones I saw was just this hyper focus on our food. It needs to be natural, it needs to be clean, whatever that means. So we have to remove red dye. And so this becomes problematic though, because as you know, as your audience knows, health is multifaceted. There
Yes.
is a concept we all learn in public health called social determinants of health. These are all the non-medical factors that affect your health and health outcomes. So when people traditionally think of health, they think clean diet, exercise every day. If you're obese, it just means you're lazy. If
Hmm.
you have chronic illness, it's some factor that you had complete control over. So it's your fault that you have
Yeah.
a chronic illness. So many people are missing these things like economic stability or healthcare access or the zip code you live in, the color of your skin, your health literacy, your exposure to trauma or violence. All of those things play a massive role in your health. It's not as simple as like eat clean foods with no red dye.
The movement, we'll call it the trad life movement, got attached to make America healthy again. And their answer to reducing slash eliminating chronic disease is through elimination of certain ingredient in food.
Yes. So basically, a lot of the proposals we're seeing from this group, and I say this as I polled my audience, and
Yep.
obviously my audience is going to be a little biased, but I said point blank, if you voted a certain way or different than me, or you aligned yourself with this movement, like tell me why. And I had a
Yeah.
lot of great answers and a lot of great discussions. So I do say I feel comfortable saying this is what I was seeing, and it
Yep.
probably represents the greater majority. But so they were going through, the issues they thought were important and like the key things we wanted to address. And so many of these proposals that I was seeing superficial as opposed to systemic. So banning red dye in cereal was overwhelmingly one of the conversations I was having the most. And
Really.
it's banning the red dye in cereal, all that does is increase the cost of production of the cereal. The corporation that produces it, they're not going to absorb that cost. They're going to pass that cost on to
Yeah.
the consumer. And the consumer now has a more expensive cereal that is not going to overwhelmingly improve their health in any way. So, someone who can only afford cereal, there are bigger factors at play that affect their health.
Absolutely.
It's not an ingredient in the cereal. That's not the problem. We're kind of focusing on the wrong thing. So, another example is removing fluoride from water. At the levels currently present, fluoride toxicity doesn't exist. Like you would die from water toxicity first. Removing fluoride from water would disproportionately affect anyone in lower income areas that don't have access to healthcare. The issue isn't the fluoride. The issue is the lack of access to healthcare.
I was going to say, is that the ideology? Is that fluoride and red dye are the reason why people are have or experience a chronic disease? Is that the
That is
logic
the
here?
overwhelming belief.
Wow.
So that's where I'm, as a public health professional, getting a little frustrated because these superficial solutions and then fear mongering around these ingredients distract from the actual systemic issues like food insecurity or healthcare access.
So, and I just want to like to me, it's just so mind blowing that there is a good portion of the population in America that believes that by doing these two things or other little things like this, we're going to solve chronic health conditions.
Well, and it's interesting to kind of tie it back to our social
Yeah.
media, our trad wives, is on an individual level, certain things like this may affect your health, especially if you have the privilege to have safe housing. Even if groceries are too expensive, you can still afford them and still choose what to eat. That's a big deal. You can
Yeah.
send it to the doctor. So perhaps if you already have those big things met, these little minute details may make an improvement in your life. But overall, as a big picture, not the focus, not the thing that's going to make a meaningful impact.
And I read somewhere that the MAHA movement, when their baseline is the increase in chronic health condition.
Yes.
So I guess they're explaining the increase in chronic health condition or the proportion increase due to those ingredient in food and ingredient in water instead of the real public health issue, which
Yes.
is a social determinant of health. That's
Yes.
the idea.
So
Wow.
basically, the proponents of this movement, they claim to want to make the nation healthier, which is great. We can all get on board with that.
All
We
of
all
us.
want our countries and nations healthier. But basically, the critics of this movement are now looking at it and saying we are ignoring or dismissing all of the evidence-based health measures that affect health. So this is where it also gets tricky. Can two things be true at once? Can we address the root cause of disease and remove red dye? Sure, why not? But one has significantly more impact than the other. And one party historically passed more policy that addresses the root cause than the other. And that is not the party that was voted into power. So that's where this gets weird. And that's where I think the Democratic Party missed the boat here. So I'm going to say something that is going to be a little crazy, but
Yeah.
the MAHA movement, it should have been a blue movement. It has blue agenda written all over it. Health, wellness, individual health choices, addressing the root cause, policy that helps everyone. Those are historically Democratic Party efforts. I'm saying we because I vote
Yeah.
Democratic. Just throw it out there. I'm sure people know at this point, but the Democratic Party has been at the forefront of efforts to protect environment, water, food safety, limiting drilling and emissions from oil companies. They pass health forward policies that affect things like school lunches. They expand access
Yeah.
to our government programs like SNAP and WIC, which make food accessible to women and children. And that's all public record. People can verify that. As someone who voted Democrat, I'll be the first to say that I think Democrats made a huge mistake not taking this movement seriously and addressing these concerns in a way that appealed to the wellness girlies, because the wellness girlies, they decided this vote. So as someone who kind of works in reproductive justice, I will say I appreciate that the Democratic Party championed that topic. But ultimately, in this election, we now know that only 11% of voters were overly concerned with reproductive health at this time. Voters were more concerned about grocery bills and the health crisis. So, not taking that seriously and then not providing answers, the Republican Party was left to scoop that up and make them feel heard.
On their belief of what would solve, in the case of health, the health issue. Wow.
Yes. So, um, RFK he's gone either way. He was looking to align himself with someone
Yeah.
in the government. He was willing to take meetings with both presidential candidates. Ultimately, the Republican candidate chose to meet with him, and they decided to align. So what we were ultimately left with was RFK and his wellness girlies aligning themselves with a very conservative agenda and voting a party into office who has historically never taken the health of this nation seriously and is actively dismantling public health programs. So now we're left with this chaos, right? Like we're all looking at this like, how did this happen? But if you kind of look back, it was a slow and steady snowball leading to this point of which party is going to snap up this movement and take their concerns seriously. Because honestly, the base of it makes sense. We want to address chronic illness. We do. Unfortunately, the framing of the health issues as an individual problem rather than a public health problem is a little misguided, but here we are.
And I want to go forward and think about what could happen and I'm not trying to catastrophize in any way, but if this agenda on how to make America healthy again, their particular belief moves forward and gets legislated, favorized, am I true to say that we're actually going to increase chronic health condition, if this is what we choose, this is what you choose to focus in America as far as health initiative?
So I've been trying really hard not to panic and then,
No.
and then make my community panic, but I don't think this is going to lead anywhere great. And I don't think the Maha movement is going to get the outcome that they had hoped for. This new
Okay.
administration is very pro deregulation, and we know that deregulation leads to chaos. So, for instance, we've seen a lot of deregulation around our food safety, and we're seeing a lot more foodborne illness outbreaks. That puts people at risk. I work with pregnant people. That terrifies me because now I have to make sure they know all of these different ways that they could potentially get listeria, which comes with very serious consequences for them. And what I'm struggling to deal with is that the people who are aligning themselves with this movement and made the choice that they did, that might not be something that they consider. Is deregulating our public health organizations and programs comes with very serious consequences. Like, hey, no one's overseeing if the deli workers are cleaning appropriately. And now we have listeria everywhere. What's our plan for that? It's like we're going two steps backwards. And then, like I said, with something like eliminating fluoride from water, sure, on a personal level, you can make the choice to buy a certain toothpaste or get a fluoride treatment if you want it. But for the people that are marginalized or in an area where fluoride in their water is the only time they have access to fluoride, they're the ones who are hurt the most. They probably don't have access to healthcare. They probably don't have dental insurance. Yay, America, teeth aren't part of our insurance. We have to have separate dental insurance. So most people don't have it. It harms them. So I do feel like we're in a really frustrating place where the biggest voices of this movement aren't acknowledging the privilege they have to be focused on
Mm.
such tiny details. And the people who are going to be harmed are the ones who are in these low income communities who can't afford to care if there's red dye in their food.
And those that are hurt right now are going to get quote unquote
Or
more hurt,
yes.
more impacted by this.
And I mean, I don't love thinking that. I don't love saying it. I've generally been optimistic, especially with presidential elections. I'm like, they can
Yeah.
only do so much. But as we've seen areas of our government flip, it's getting a little scary. So I think that kind of leads us into
What
what
do we
we
do?
can do. What's done is done, right? We are where we are, unfortunately. So at this point, all we can really do is advocate on a state level. And it's hard, right? Because again, we're talking about privilege. If you're already in a state that has really bad health outcomes or really poor public health initiatives, it's hard to advocate for better while the federal government is actively working against you. So again, tricky, right? If you're in a blue state that prioritizes things like public health, you're in a great position already. The federal government has some impact, but your local government's already working for you. So if you're in a red state, it's like you have two additional barriers. You've got to, battle your state and battle your federal. So it's hard. When I say focus on state level policy, it depends on where you live. And that's another social determinant of health. You don't always get a say where you live.
Can you take a minute in case somebody's listening to social determinant of health? They've heard about it, but they're not 100% clear on what it is, the science behind it, and the impact. Can you take a little deep dive in that for a bit?
Yeah. So, kind of like how I said earlier, social determinants health, it's a concept in public health curriculum that we all learn about. It's all of the non-medical factors. So, like
Okay.
I said, when people think about health, they think about like what you eat and exercise. But
Exercise
yeah, pretty much exercise.
and your weight, the
And
three
things,
things, right?
yes. It's just we know, indisputably it's more than that. So all of these different factors, where you live, and not everyone can just pick up and move.
No.
Moving is very expensive. Your ability to access healthcare, and it's a little tricky in the States because our healthcare is tied to a job. And then if you don't have a job, you have to get healthcare through our very, very limited options through the government. And it's not great and it's not accepted everywhere. And some people are like, well, just find a new job. It's not always that easy. And then things like being exposed to violence or trauma, those things all affect your health. You're not always in control if you're exposed to trauma or violence. Things like having grocery stores nearby. People take that for granted. There are people that don't have a grocery store within 20 miles of their house. Get in your car and drive. Okay, you're assuming I have a car. Not
Yeah.
everyone has a car. America's not exactly known for its great public transit. So you're left with 7-Eleven, which is our little convenience store, which they're not going to carry anything other than ultra processed foods. So there's all these facets of health that I feel like aren't being taken seriously, or people just aren't sure what they are or how they play into health. So that really comes down to us as public health professionals or nutrition professionals or exercise professionals to make sure we're educating people about them. And we're trying, but this movement really felt like a slap in the face because it basically undermines all of it.
And I want to intersect the privilege concept around this. So I talk a lot about thin privilege, white privilege. But when you are in a position of social economic privilege, perhaps race privilege, specifically in America, these social determinants of health may not even be in your awareness because it's all available to you.
Yes, it's something you've never had to think about. These aren't barriers for you. And that's essentially what privilege is. People get really triggered by that word.
Yes.
But privilege just means that someone else has more barriers than you. And those barriers are not because of anything you did personally. They're outside factors that you have no control over. So for whatever reason, someone was born into this situation, someone else was born into this situation. This person has 20 barriers, this person has three. It's just how it happened. So the person who only has three barriers, no one's saying they're not working hard. No one's saying, that they don't care as much about, their health or whatever else, but they simply have less barriers to go through. So if you were born in a safe neighborhood, you were born in the right colored skinned body, you were born in a state that prioritizes access to health care, you're born in a place where you have a grocery store nearby. You have family money or support when it comes to raising children. All of those things make it easier for you to focus on much smaller details of your health. Whereas somebody else who can't even get to a grocery store, they do not care about red dye in their cereal. Their focus is how the hell am I going to feed my family dinner? Any dinner.
And so I'll pursue in that track. Then when we assign leadership on health issue to someone living with those privilege who is not aware of those privilege, that's when the problem blows up because
Yes.
they're not being concerned with anything they are not struggling with.
Yes. And that's where I kind of think, because everyone loves to talk about root cause, but I
Yeah.
do feel like the people who don't actually have to face root cause every day aren't entirely sure what that means. I feel like to a lot of people, root cause is like, again, more superficial, like, well, what types of food are you eating? As opposed to, can you even afford food? Or do you have food nearby?
Enough.
It goes a lot deeper. It's a lot deeper than, hey, you chose to eat chips over apples. It's like, well, why were chips the only thing available?
So I guess that's when we think about what we can do or where we need to look is understanding that the person in charge of our health initiative is that person has this health look. Consider social determinant as part of the solution, the broad solution, not just a solution for the privilege.
And that's where I'm struggling is I have tried to remain optimistic this last week, which has been tough, but I
Yeah.
have been like, okay, let's explore the platform and what the plan is. And it's early, the plans will change, but RFK's plans are all very superficial, like I stated, kind of going back to that is it's all focused on removing certain food ingredients, removing things from the water, impacting children by messing around with very well researched, very well studied, very evidence based vaccine schedules. And then on a broader scale, deregulation, which makes food safety a huge risk. So I'm not overly optimistic, but I would love to be proved wrong. So I really think at this point moving forward, we really need to, if people voted a certain way for this administration because they want to, address chronic health
Yeah.
disease, I want them to hold these people accountable. You know what I mean? Like you voted them
Mhm.
into office. Now make them do what they said they were going to do. They want to address chronic health. So I want to see policy put into place, and then I want someone measuring the impact so we can see if the policies that people think are going to change health do. If they do, great. Never been so happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
If they don't, which I believe they won't, then we know we need to course correct. The problem is within this little fun trial period that we've just put into play, a lot of people in marginalized communities are going to be harmed.
The other thing I want to hear you talk about is also as the political office takes shapes and start controlling the narrative, which political office control the narrative, no matter which party it is.
Yeah.
It's also for us to be self-aware,
Mhm.
that, well, fluoride or the dye may not actually be the issue.
And that's the hard part is combating misinformation on social media, as you know,
Yes.
is very hard. Controversial takes sell. Evidence-based public health practice is not sexy or exciting. It's not. I have somehow managed to grow a following sharing evidence-based content, but it's not nearly as big as the trad wives. It'll never be
Yeah.
that big. So I think moving forward, public health professionals and science communicators and anyone else who does work sharing evidence online, we need to take a good hard look at honestly what Maha did right in terms of their messaging because they did it right. Something about it worked. And we need to figure out how to do that when talking about things like social determinants of health. We got to figure out how to make that sexy because it's not very sexy right now. And I don't think a lot of people care.
This is an opinion, as again, as a Canadian. Is it that we didn't, no, I say we being the other side of the spectrum, like, is it that we didn't make it sexy or we didn't talk about it enough?
See, and it's hard because I try to make sure my social media bubble has various voices, but it ultimately ends up being a little bit of a bubble. So I see it all the time. And that's why I was a little bit blindsided because I was like, all I see are people talking about this. How did we get it so wrong? Which is why I ultimately ended up opening my messages and tell me, what are you seeing? Why did you vote this way? What was important about the Maha movement that ultimately swayed your vote? I think we got to do more stuff like that. I think we got to get outside our bubble because I think we're all in our niche, right? A lot of my internet colleagues are public health professionals. So all day I hear people talking about this stuff and I'm like, great, our message is out there. We're golden. It wasn't. It wasn't out there. People weren't listening. I don't know if they weren't seeing it. I don't know if they don't care. I don't know if people are just so, and we're in a tough place in America. We're a tough place around the world. Post-pandemic has been hard across the world.
Yeah.
All economies everywhere. People are struggling. So I think people are angry. I think people are tired of things like their grocery bill being too high. I get it. Mine's too high too. It sucks. And overwhelmingly, what people were telling me in my DMs is, what we're doing isn't working, whatever it is, what we're doing is
Yes.
not working. So we need to blow it up and try something different. And blow it up we did. So we're going to see how that plays out. I don't know if that was a good solution long term. I'm inclined to say no. Again, happy to be proven wrong. But ultimately, I think people were just angry and they just needed something different. And this movement provided something different.
And and it's because I heard a lot of discourse also on the economy, which we're not going to talk about, but I think it parallels the health issue
Yes.
in which right now in Canada, we're seeing the same thing. The parties who talk about economy, we're in a very multi-party space. It's very different from American. But those who talk about having more money in your pocket at the
Yep.
individual level are more popular.
Yes. And we saw that overwhelmingly. Like when I talked about the reproductive health stat, that is an important topic for America. But right now, people can't care about that when they can't afford their groceries.
Yes. And same thing, but they talk about it constantly. It's on repeat. And if we don't match that up
Yes.
on the other side, same thing with health. If they're talking about health on
Yes.
repeat and offering solution and we don't, then for sure the party who's offering a proposal will win.
Yes. 100%. And that's literally what we saw play out is, like I said, I appreciated the narrative around reproductive health. That's what I do.
Yeah.
But I overwhelmingly saw the other side focused on money and health. Those things won. It's hard for me to feel optimistic, like I keep saying, because historically this party has not been focused on health. But maybe if if the people who voted them into power hold them accountable, we'll see some change. And maybe it will ultimately end up being good. I'm hopeful, I guess, that that would be the case. But at the same time, we are kind of preparing for the worst. It's like, how on the state level do
Yeah.
we make sure these marginalized communities are protected because they are going to be the ones harmed by this? The people who voted, the Maha movement, the trad wives, they're not going to be harmed by this. They're not. They're in a position of privilege. They're not going to lose access to like their safe
No.
communities or their garden or their access to care, anything like that. If they want to use fluoride, they can buy a fluoride toothpaste, if it's not in the water. Or if they don't want to use one, they don't have to buy one either. So it's not going to harm them. So now we have to focus on as public health professionals. So we have this experiment going on at the federal level. We're not sure how that's going to play out. We have to protect these marginalized communities. We have to go state level now. It's more grassroots efforts at this point. It feels very like dig in your heels and get out and talk to your community. We have to reframe public health as a collective responsibility. Health is so individualized right now. And that's again tying back into social determinants of health. Health is not individual. There are certainly things we do. Like I actually pulled some stats. The average American, we're eating less than one serving of fruit and vegetables per day. We are drinking alcohol, at least one drink a day. We are not exercising, like at all. Just no exercise is being had. We're eating less than 15 grams of fiber. You're a nutrition expert. You know these things are important on an individual level. These things matter. But again, if you don't have access to a safe environment, if you're working three jobs because you can't afford your house, if you don't have access to a grocery store, like you don't give a fuck if you're meeting 15 grams of fiber or not. That is so irrelevant. So we have to come back to, hey, there are individual things we can certainly do to improve our health, but it is so much bigger than that. We have a collective responsibility to care about the health of everybody. And it's not going to be addressed by removing red dye 40.
So when I hear the word education, it's the education at the individual level of the social determinant of health, of the importance of supporting legislation or movement towards making sure everyone in a population is covered when it comes to health.
And I don't know if anyone has successfully really done that, to be honest. So
Yeah.
I know obviously some countries are better at it. Some countries have
Well,
gotten closer to the goal line. I feel like are moving away from the goal line. But I mean, we have to focus on policies that address these factors because if you can't afford food, it doesn't matter about the ingredients in your food don't matter if you can't afford food. So really kind of where we're at, where this conversation ends and then picks up at a different level is we now just have to focus on kind of our smaller community subsets. We kind of lost sight at the
mhm.
federal level, unfortunately. So now we have to kind of get a little bit smaller and then hopefully from those little smaller communities, we can create a ripple effect outward. So it does feel like we're kind of starting over, but maybe we can start over with a fresh perspective.
I got one question as I was reading and preparing for this. I heard the term corporate capture and its impact on food policy. Explain that a little bit because that's a narrative that people will hear from Maha is corporate capture.
We recently in the States, and I don't want to get too into it because it's
No.
just not my area, but we recently in the States had like a town hall or a round table at the federal
Mhm.
level of a bunch of influencers, not health experts, unfortunately,
Yep.
influencers talking about the problems in our country and the solutions that they propose, which is kind of where this Maha stuff started. So a lot of these influencers are questionable. They push pseudoscience, but they have big followings and they're trendy and sexy. So a lot of people listened. And a lot of it was based on corporations. So, for instance, like the company that owns Kellogg's cereal, for
Yep.
instance, that was a big, big part of this conversation and how, the corporate greed, that's really what's pushing chronic illness. And that's certainly part of social determinants of health include that. They do. So we're like halfway there. But again, kind of tying it back to our conversation, addressing it doesn't mean forcing them to take certain ingredients out of food because like we said they're just going to pass that cost on to
Yeah.
the consumer. I don't have an answer for how to address the corporate capture of let's just say food.
Food pharma. I mean,
Yeah,
this it's like
I'm
food
not
pharma medical in the US, right? It's
ultimately it would come down to some type of regulation. In my mind, it would come down to some type of like tax or fine. I'm not going to pretend this is my area of expertise, but just
No.
from kind of a public health perspective, you've got to penalize them in some way, right? So it would come down to like a tax or a fine or some type of policy. But the problem is we just voted in a administration that's very deregulation for pro corporate.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to make sense of because I feel like we got lost in the messaging of like health, 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 health without realizing we were voting in people that are actively dismantling these systems and empowering corporations to do more.
To get more involved.
Yes.
Because
And
that's what corporate captured, the way I understand it, is the involvement or corporation and their ultimate desire of profitability involved in health decisions,
it's
which is
ultimately like corporations control the government, which again, it's a problem. But again, I'm not sure that voting in a party that has historically been very pro corporation was the answer to the health crisis. I think that's going to get because corporations aren't interested in the health crisis; they're interested in profit. So
profit, which by itself is not wrong because that's the foundation of a corporation. Then we need to question corporation altogether.
yes. So again, we're having trouble. I say we, my friends who are political
Yeah.
analysts who are looking at this, but we're having trouble kind of piecing all of these things together because it's like we had this movement that was grounded in this great base that historically should have been a democratic movement that was ultimately captured by a Republican Party that is very pro-corporation and deregulation, which actively goes against everything that Maha wants. So I can't go there because that's outside my realm.
Okay.
Someone's going to have to do a really great study on that, but it was very weird to see how it played out in real life on social media because you're watching these people actively vote against their best interests because someone said something like really sexy about removing food dye. So like I said, I think at this point, I really hope they just hold people accountable and we kind of have to see where we go from here. There's really no other option.
Can we talk about reproductive care for a short minute?
Yeah.
In which, as a Canadian, I'll make this observation. Many times during the interview, we highlighted that the new government in America is all about deregulating. So I have no choice but to make the observation that when it comes to reproductive care, they're actually doing the opposite. They're trying to regulate it more.
So it's almost like you have to look at it. It's having the federal and the state levels is so complicated, but on a federal level, they want to basically, it's not the quite the right word, but
Yeah.
deregulate, send it back to the states. So then their idea is we're not regulating it. It's
They're passing the puck.
yes. So that's where it got a little confusing is it was more they were like, no, this isn't a federal government thing. Every state can make their own decisions, which has led to a whole slew of problems.
Okay, so they're standing by their platform of deregulation, even when it comes to reproductive care, but that didn't solve the issue at all because now the states are getting involved to regulate reproductive care.
Well, and it's a patchwork of laws that change based on, where you live. And again, we're going to talk about privilege. You can't always just jump in your car and drive to another state for care. So again, there are federal regulations in place for a reason. It's for the protection of everybody in the nation. And when we start dismantling it and breaking it down, there are consequences. And I do think we're going to see a lot of health consequences in these historically
Yeah.
red or Republican states because there are no state level protections in play. And now we have no federal level protections in play. So I'm not super optimistic, unfortunately.
On
I'm
both fronts, both health and the niche of reproductive care, both because they're moved on to state. Now it's going to be 52 problem to solve instead of one global
yes.
problem to solve nationally.
Yeah.
For you guys in the field of reproductive, oh Lord.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess across the board. And I don't really have answers for that, unfortunately. I'm trying. I'm already getting, I mean, I'm always involved kind of
Yeah.
grassroots level, but more involved at this point because of what happened. So kind of have my ear to the ground on, what's happening locally or at the state level. A lot of states are trying to pass policy to protect health across the board, just
Okay.
health in all different ways. But again, this comes down to like, do you live in a blue state or do you live in a red state? And you don't always get to make that decision. So if you're protected or not, it's kind of up in the air.
When it comes to reproductive care, given that we understand it's going down to the states and it's going to be different where you live, do you have advice or what we should think about as a woman in regards to reproductive care, what we should do?
So I just did a story about this on my
Okay.
Instagram. I was trying not to be super fear-mongering, more just like, hey, this is what we're facing, and these are things that you should just have on your radar. If you don't want kids, then your partner should be getting a vasectomy, or you should be thinking about long-term sterilization options. You should be getting Plan B. That's openly available. Stock your med cabinet.
I did not know that. So I'm sure
Yes.
many people did not know that.
Yeah, you do not have to do anything crazy to get Plan B. No one's gonna like ID you or anything. Go get Plan
Okay.
B. In terms of Plan C or period pills is what we're gonna call them, you can order
Okay.
those online still, and it's right now safe and legal. And so I'm telling people, if you are worried about access to reproductive health care in the future, I am just saying I would recommend having period pills on hand.
Out of ignorance, what's period pill?
A period pill is a pill that when you haven't gotten your period in a while and you might suspect you're pregnant, it makes your period start.
Different than Plan B.
Yes. Plan B is what you take when you've had unprotected intercourse, and you can take it within a certain time frame to basically kind of push back ovulation
Yeah.
to make it less likely for you to get pregnant.
And it's within a certain number of hours, if my memory. Okay.
Yes. I mean, the
Okay.
sooner the better,
Yes,
obviously. But yeah.
obviously.
So I've been telling people, I'm like, have these conversations with your partner. Think about what you want for your reproductive health. Have plans in place. And then this is where it gets tricky because I'm actually talking to my own pregnant clients about this is if you live in a red state right now, we're not going to
Yeah.
see any crazy changes at the federal level too quickly. But right now, if you're in a red state, and you are planning on getting pregnant, you need to have a plan. And unfortunately, that probably includes an emergency fund. If anything goes wrong, you need to know your state's laws, what treatments you have access to, if your providers are willing to provide those treatments, because some of them won't. They're afraid they're going to go to jail.
Uh-uh.
And then you need to have a plan to leave the state in the worst case scenario. And that really sucks. That sucks to have
Uh-huh.
to make that plan if you're just excited about trying to have a baby. But things go wrong. Pregnancy is not a health neutral event. And you could have a very desired pregnancy with a very terrible outcome. And if you're in a red state, it ultimately means you could die. So this is the conversation I'm having with my community now is if you're trying to conceive and you're going into this new administration, you need to have these plans in place. It's not like, hey, what's on your registry or how are you going to decorate your nursery? It's please make sure that you have a plan for how you would manage a complication.
Where do I find this information to know the legislation in my state, or where do I send my people to get this information?
So I was going to say, I can actually send you some really great links that are continually
Perfect.
updated by grassroots organizations. It's hard to, because like certain Instagram accounts regularly get shut
Yeah.
down. You know what I mean? So having like the actual website is a little bit
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
I can send you those links. And then like the Gut Matcher Institute, they always have a great list of like where each state is at with its individual policies, rights, whatever you want to call it. And then there are organizations that put together like, hey, here's where you can get these pills, or you can get help, or you can get funding. So I can send those all to you, and those are always available. I just don't know moving forward what we're looking at a federal level. So this is all still it changes. It changes all the time, which is really hard to keep up with. So again, for my pregnant population, I'm just like, hey, try to just stay on top of what's happening in your state, because that's really as much as we can do right now. And just make sure you have a plan.
You've been alluded to a couple times that you work with your population. Can you tell us what you do to help
So it's kind of complicated because I kind of live like a life off of social media
in
and
public
then
health?
yeah, and then kind of on social media. So if we're talking about like who people see every day, I focus on women's health. I actually created a brand new signature program called Pregnancy Academy. It's the only comprehensive program that covers everything from like learning about your menstrual cycle, trying to conceive every single trimester, what to expect, nutrition, exercise, labor and delivery, postpartum, because you don't get that. Everything else is like you can buy a exercise program for pregnancy, or you can get a nutrition
Peace.
plan for pregnancy. It's all pieces, right? You have to piece it together. So over the last year, I've been getting all of those pieces and putting them in one place with the help of various experts. So that is, I actually have a group of beta members who have been testing it for months, and we're making it amazing and perfect. And we're about to kind of open that up to the public. So that's what I do for my pregnant community online. So I have this space for them where it's got the course, it's got simple things like a printout of safe over-the-counter medications. So you're not Googling at 2 in the morning.
I know.
That sucks. I'm actually adding a component based on the current situation of how pregnancy is political and the steps you need to take to ensure your safety. So that will be in there. So that's kind of my social media face. I always want to make sure, we're inclusive, we're touching on
Yep.
everything. So we have that. And then offline, I'm actually getting my master's in nursing. I haven't decided. I was really focused on midwifery. I want to deliver babies, but given where we're headed, I think having kind of like a women's health perspective under my belt, not that I don't have that, but just from a nurse practitioner perspective
Yep.
would be very important. So now I'm kind of looking at dual certifications in women's health and midwifery, just so that out in my community, I can help in a very tangible, direct way.
Hmm.
So part of the issue is I actually started in nursing like 10 years ago, but then I was getting really frustrated by the fact that you can only trade so much time, right? Like you can only see so many patients. So
Yes.
there was this like limited impact, which is why I bailed and went public health. Because I was like, okay, we're gonna do community level, population level. And then of course I hit this wall where I'm like, well, shoot, now that I have this big community, they all want individual help. So we're right back
Here,
where we
yeah.
started. So kind of tackling it in both ways. And the place that I live now is considered a swing state. So we can go, one way or the other, depending on what's going on. And reproductive health here is currently protected, but again, we're not quite sure where it's going. So just having the knowledge and then licensing to be able to help my community, again, we got to go grassroots, is going to be really important moving forward. So I did make the decision to go back into nursing and just try to help that way as well.
Another degree for you after political science and public health.
Yes.
Wow.
My husband laughs. He's like, how many degrees are you trying to collect? I'm like, as many as it takes to help everybody.
Well, it's been a very educational conversation for me on multiple levels. So thank you for that. Whenever I have questions about reproductive right, pregnancy, you're becoming my go-to person. I would invite everyone to follow you. The way you explain information, the way you share, and that's how you came on my spectrum, is very well done.
I appreciate that. I know it's tough because online, I do talk about very controversial things, and I know that there is a subset of people who do not like me. And I do try to make sure that I am taking various viewpoints into consideration. Even with this conversation, I did want to be mindful because, these are people who they have these values, and this means a lot to them, and I want to respect that. But it's also important to kind of touch on, where things go wrong, how some of this is
Mhm.
misguided. I don't want to necessarily alienate anyone because that's
Mm.
how we got where we are today. So I do try to balance like, hey, here's where I think we wanted to go, and like here's where we kind of fell off, and then like how do we get back? So hopefully I'm doing that in a decent way online.
Very well done. Thank you very much, Amanda, for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, my sisters, if you are loving what you are learning on the podcast, you have to come and check out our feminist mentorship masterclasses and our internationally recognized non-diet coaching certification on our website at www.stephaniedoty.com/shop. This is where you can get the individual coaching and the support to take the concept taught on the podcast to the next level. Embrace our well-being in a way that will expand our collective freedom and power. Come and join myself and other women to learn how to reshape your mind, not your body. I'll see you there.